It is another edition of Browns Insider here on Wednesday night on cleveland.com. Dan Labbe and Mary Kay Cabot, and we are previewing one of the biggest Browns games in recent memory, Mary Kay. I'm trying to think back to the last time the Browns had a divisional game that was this important. I mean, you almost have to go back to 2007. I remember they went to Pittsburgh that year, and they ended up losing that game, but that was a pretty big game. Can you think of one kind of off the top of your head that stands out?
You know what, not quite this big, but the Browns, you know, when you look back to last year, it was pretty big when they did play Cincinnati.
Yeah.
They did have something at stake just last year, and they kind of imploded there in the second quarter, if you recall, with the blocks and just a fiasco that they had. But for the most part, to be in it this late, in fact, for the Browns and the Bengals to be playing for first place beyond weekend, it hasn't happened since 1986.
Wow. And, you know, I'm trying to think, Cincinnati hasn't always been a friendly place for them in these situations. You mentioned what happened last year. And then, you know, you referenced 2007 again. Derek Anderson went down there and threw 4 interceptions, and the Browns no longer controlled their destiny. Of course, we all know how that played out. So it hasn't always been a friendly place for them, and divisional road games in general haven't always been friendly to the Browns.
Well, that's right. I mean, there are a couple things clashing here. First of all, the Browns have lost 17 straight divisional games on the road. That's the longest streak. Tom Reed had a story about this earlier in the week. That's the longest streak since the 1970 merger for anyone in the NFL. And then you look at what the Bengals have going. At home, they have not lost. They're unbeaten in their last 14 games at home. That's pretty incredible. That goes back to the end of 2012. They didn't lose there last year, and they haven't lost there this year. They have tied, but they haven't lost.
You know, I'm looking at the Bengals and Browns, comparing them, and at least statistically speaking, these are two very even teams. They both struggle stopping the run. They both can score a little bit. Now, the Browns' offense has sort of been a work in progress over the last few weeks. They got off to that great start, but very similar teams, it seems like.
They are. They're evenly matched in certain areas for sure. So I think that's one of the reasons why this is going to be a good, very close, very tight football game. You know, there's certain things that each team does a little better than the other, but I think that if you had to go down and score them, item for item, you'd probably end up with an equal amount of checks on both sides of the ledger. And, it's just going to come down to, I have my thoughts on what it'll come down to. I think that the Browns' defense has been so opportunistic lately, and Andy Dalton is throwing some interceptions, and I think that'll be the difference.
And we all remember Joe Hayden last year, of course, had that interception return for a touchdown when things were going well in that game, at least for a while. An old friend of the Browns, Greg Little, he had some comments as well, so that's going to add some fuel to the fire. Were you at all surprised that Greg Little kind of spoke up, considering A, who he is and kind of what he's done this season, and B, that he was ready to talk, that the Bengals were, the Bengals' response to it?
Well, obviously, first of all, I'm never surprised by anything that Greg Little does, because, he said some of those kinds of things, when he was here. But you know what? I just don't think that it was wise for him to provide the Browns with bulletin board material. I cannot imagine that Marvin Lewis is loving some of the things that he said. And I would have to think that they will use it as a rallying cry. Now, I remember back in the day when Bill Belichick was here, he would seize upon something like this. Oh, he would use this for everything that it was worth. Yeah. He would have those comments up in the team meeting. He was always looking for someone that was disrespecting his club. And that's what Greg did with this. Somebody's got to pay. That is showing a little bit of sign of disrespect.
Yeah.
And I think that if Mike Pettin is wise, he will use it to his advantage.
Do you think that's how the Browns are going to use this? You
know what, they're saying publicly that they won't. I've talked to Dante Whitner. I've talked to other people. The game is played between the lines. You say all those kind of things. But you know what? You need everything that you can get in a game like this, and he gave them something.
Yeah, and you talk about guys like Whitner. Some of these guys weren't here last year. This team has had a lot of turnover, but can they still kind of draw some motivation from this as well? You know what? I think so. And it'll be funny because, Joe Hayden, he's not one to get his feathers ruffled in any way, shape, or form. He's a friend of Greg Little's. They're very good friends. And, so I don't think, it will really work on him. But I do think that maybe, I do think a guy like Dante Whitner could
maybe get a little extra fired up if you stoke it just the right way.
Yeah.
And I think there are other guys on the team, maybe a Carlos Dansby, some of these more emotional guys that might be able to find a little extra something for some words like that.
Now, the impact of the short week. It obviously makes for a weird practice schedule. It gets the team out of a rhythm. We know about the negatives. Are there any benefits to a short week at all, in your mind?
Oh, yeah, there are benefits to the short week, but they don't happen until after the game.
Yeah.
And that is the little mini bye that you get after this game. And, I'm guessing that they might not even bring the players in on Friday. Now, if they do, maybe they'll bring them in for a little bit of film study, some kind of a little light walkthrough or something to correct mistakes or whatever. But then they'll have Saturday, Sunday, and Monday off. So you'll get guys that'll have a chance to heal. If Phil Taylor doesn't play in this game, he ought to be back for the next game. Jordan Cameron might have a chance to heal from his concussion. Same thing with Johnson Batamosi. I know the Browns are really expecting Andrew Hawkins to play, and he'll do the best that he can, but if he can't give them a full game, he'll have a chance to heal up. Other than that, no, it's a grind trying to get ready for a Thursday night game. Nobody feels good yet. I mean, you can even see Brian Hoyer's on the injury report with the glute issue. We saw him get knocked on his backside a number of times in this game. So it's a tough call to go back out there 4 days later and try to win a football game.
Yeah, especially because usually it's Thursday, the day that you kind of look at guys and say, okay, this guy maybe won't be able to play. It's still a question, but that's game day this time around, so you don't really have that window.
Yeah, and you know what? The only consolation is everyone has to do it. Everyone in the league has to do it. The other team has to do it. Now, the only benefit that the Bengals have is that they don't have to travel. They're in their element. They're in their routine, and they are, again, at home where they never lose.
Does it benefit the Browns, though, that this is a game in Cincinnati? It's not their matchup against Atlanta. They're not going to Carolina. It's Cincinnati, so you're not really going to have that long travel.
Well, that does help. Yeah, it's not like you're heading out to the East Coast or something like that. And they do that on purpose. Most of these Thursday night games are division games, so you have an opportunity to know your opponent a little bit. Oddly enough, this is a new coaching staff, so they don't really know the Bengals as well as other coaches have, and it's the first time they're playing the Bengals, so they haven't had the benefit of game planning for them one other time. So they had to start working on them. They've probably been working on the Bengals for a while, knowing that they weren't going to have any time to do it this week.
Okay, the game itself. Offensively, we mentioned the Browns have been struggling. The run game specifically. Now, Terrence West kind of came out of his shell a little bit on Sunday. It wasn't a great performance, but he had that big block. He was running well in the second half. Are we going to see this trend where Terrence West maybe gets the bulk of the carries more tomorrow night?
Well, you know what? You have to go with what works for you. And, they tried it, and it worked for them a little bit. So I think you keep trying it until it stops working. And for whatever reason, Ben Tate was stalled, wasn't able to get any yards. And they also feel that Isaiah Crowell they weren't seeing what they wanted to see in practice from Isaiah. Now, does that mean he didn't do it, the last few days enough to get on the field in Cincinnati? That's the big mystery. The good thing about it is that they have the element of surprise.
Yep.
They can throw Isaiah Crowell, and maybe that was part of their strategy here. Maybe they wanted to try to keep him under wraps a little bit and spring him on the Bengals so that they're kind of lulled into a false sense of security, and then all of a sudden you got the crow flying at you.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I saw someone kind of throw out a theory that, maybe over these last 3 games the Browns have been playing down a little bit, but maybe they've also been playing kind of vanilla. I mean, we saw it in the preseason a little bit. If you go back there, they didn't show us very much in the preseason, and they didn't really even show us Isaiah Crowell until that final game against the Bears.
Right.
Is there anything to the idea that maybe this offense has gone kind of vanilla leading up to the Cincinnati game?
It could very well be that. And now again, it's a little bit of a risky proposition because they haven't actually been blowing teams out. It's been a little bit of tough sledding against teams that you wouldn't have wanted it to be or expected it to be for them. But I would say that there may be a little bit of gamesmanship here in keeping Crowell under wraps. The Johnny package. We haven't seen the Johnny package since he has not been out on the field since Baltimore in week 3. So, you know what? Maybe they've got something in the works that way. They're going to have to pull out all the stops, and those could be some things they could do.
Yeah, how do you think they would employ the Johnny Manziel package? We've kind of seen, he comes out and runs a series, and we saw the first time they did it on the second down, which I thought was kind of an interesting wrinkle instead of starting the drive with him. And then they ran that trick play that was maybe illegal, and it didn't count anyway because of another penalty. But do you think we'll see something in that vein, or could it be a situation where maybe they get down in the red zone where they've been struggling and they say, Johnny, let's see what you can do for us?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, I could see them doing something like that in the red zone, particularly because Jordan Cameron will be out this game again. And, Andrew Hawkins really hasn't been able to catch touchdown passes. He only has one so far this season, and he's going into this game injured. So you're a little bit challenged in some ways. And, I think that however they use it, they will try to use it in such a way that you're completely catching the other team off guard. It could be red zone, it could be middle of the field, it could be end of the half, whatever the case may be, they'll try to surprise the Bengals with it.
And we know the folks at NFL Network would love to see a lot of the Johnny Manziel package on Thursday night. There'll be a lot of sideline shots of Johnny Manziel, at least we know that. The injury front, you've mentioned it a little bit. I don't think anyone was counting on Jordan Cameron being out there, but Andrew Hawkins, if he can't play, that's a big loss to have. He's been their best receiver all season long. If he can't go tomorrow night, how do they replace that?
Well, that would be very, very, very difficult. Now, fortunately for them, first of all, I think Andrew Hawkins will play. This is the Bengals. He's got another little bit more time to heal up, not as much as he would like, of course, but it is the Bengals, his former team, and even Mike Pettin said, if I was betting on the kid, I bet he's going to play. So we can expect him to play. Now, he might not be out there every single down, so you're going to have to make up for it in some other ways. And other guys are just going to have to step up. One that we've seen step up tremendously is a Taylor Gabriel. I mean, he's just done a phenomenal job, and then you'll have to see a little bit more of Travis Benjamin. And Miles Austin has been doing a really nice job on third down. Every time he catches the ball these days, it seems like it's going for a first down. So they've got the bodies out there to do it, and some guys are just going to have to carry the load.
And I am an unabashed fan of Taylor Gabriel. Ever since we saw him in camp, he's worked his way into the rotation. He's the kind of story you like to see in the NFL, an undrafted guy kind of working his way in and making lots of big plays. It's been fun to watch.
It really has been. And not only was he an undrafted guy, he was just a tryout guy.
Yeah.
And those guys almost never make the football team. So it has been a very, very cool story, and he's a really neat young man, too. I think as Browns fans get to know him, they will really like him and enjoy him, and he's made some tremendous big plays for this team, and I'm sure you'll see a couple tomorrow night.
All right, now let's move on to some other things that happened this week. We talked about Greg Little, but Ray Farmer had his press conference this week. I think there was a little confusion as to why Ray spoke this week, especially because, like you said, you have the mini bye week coming up, and maybe there would have been a window of opportunity next week. Do you think it was a good time for Farmer to speak?
Well, you know what? I know I had been asking for Ray Farmer just because once you get to the midpoint of a season, you kind of really like to check in.
Yeah.
And, they've gone through a trade deadline, and, there's things about Brian Hoyer's contract. There's Jordan Cameron is in a contract year. So you do like to check in with the general manager. Now, the strategy for the philosophy for the club is that the general manager really shouldn't have too much to say during the season, and Ray feels that way as well. So we're not going to hear a lot from him, but it was kind of time. It was the halfway point. I suppose they could have waited till next week, but I don't think it really makes that much difference. But he had some very interesting things to say, I thought. And again, we found ourselves in the media room trying to interpret, in some cases, exactly, where he was going with certain things. But after I, looked it over and analyzed the quotes enough and really sort of just let them sink in a little bit, basically, if you kept reading and re-listening to what he was saying about Josh Gordon, I really do think he was saying, hey, you know what? We have to see that he is one of us, that he's a play like a Brown.
Yeah.
We feel like we're going places, we're building a championship team, and you have to fit our profile, which is to live, eat, breathe, drink football, and do whatever it takes to take this team to the next level. They want to see that he's willing to do that.
Now, on the flip side, of course, fans will hear that and they'll say, hold on, Josh Gordon is maybe the best receiver in the NFL, and the Browns, of course, could use somebody who is the best receiver in the NFL. A lot of teams could. So I think a lot of fans hear that and they think, no, when Josh Gordon's ready, you're going to put him out there and you're going to throw the ball to him a ton.
It was really a very mysterious and curious line of questions and answers. It was. I mean, we kept kind of coming back at it and saying, well, wait a minute. Are you saying he doesn't fit in? Are you saying he wouldn't have a big role? He wouldn't have, it was kind of odd. And I think it's because this regime, now Ray was around last year, but this regime, wants him to show them exactly what he's made of. And I think they're sending a message to him and saying, you've got to toe the line if you want to do this. It was interesting.
And then, of course, there's always going to be this. You have this awkward Brian Hoyer, Johnny Manziel dynamic going on. And I thought it was interesting when Ray Farmer was asked if Brian Hoyer has exceeded his expectations. He said no. When someone's asked to play, they're expected to perform well. That's what Brian Hoyer has done. Is there anything to kind of read into and interpret in what he said on that front?
Well, I think the most interesting thing, and that's the way that I wrote it, was the most interesting thing that I think he said was basically, Johnny's going to be ready at a certain point, and we're going to put everything in place around him. And once he's ready, we're going to make sure everything else is ready to roll around him, and then we will spring him basically on the world. And so I think what that means is they want to have all the pieces and parts in place. Maybe they need one or two more things. I actually think the offense is pretty complete when you have everybody's healthy for the most part. But I found that to be very interesting because that's been the question. The question is, do you commit long-term to Brian Hoyer, or do you get ready to turn your football team over to Johnny Manziel? And I asked Ray yesterday, I said point blank, are you willing to acknowledge that this is at least sort of a challenging situation or scenario that is presented to you? And he said, no, not at all. It's simple. So we'll see. It doesn't look simple from the outside looking in. It looks confusing. It looks like you've got a veteran quarterback on the brink of taking your team to the next level, maybe could possibly even get them into the playoffs this year. And then you've got your number one pick waiting in the wings. And if it weren't for Brian's contract situation, then it wouldn't be tricky. You would just ride it out with Brian as long as and see how far he could take you.
Yeah.
But because you have to make a decision on signing him or not, that makes it challenging.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird kind of things going on behind the scenes with the contract and, of course, with Johnny Manziel. He was their 22nd pick, even though you could make the case that they passed on him a few times before they finally drafted him. They did pick him in the first round with the intention of being this team's starting quarterback. Did you get any sense, though, that has changed at all? I know you asked him if he would still take Manziel at 22, and he said he would.
Yeah, and he also said, that, and I said, after watching him now for 6 months, do you still firmly believe that he can be a successful starting quarterback in the NFL? And he said yes. So if you do believe that, then I think what you're saying is, at some point we're turning this team over to Johnny. Yeah. So then Brian almost has to make a decision at that point, right? Because Brian has said he wants to start, and he's established himself as a starter this year and a little bit last year. So now Brian has to look at this situation and say, do I want to sign elsewhere where I can start, or do I want to stay here and see if I can continue to beat out Johnny Manziel?
I mean, do you see a situation where if Brian Hoyer is the starting quarterback all season long, and even if the Browns miss the playoffs, let's say they go 8-8 or 9-7, and let's say that's not good enough to make the playoffs, do you see a situation where Brian Hoyer would have to come back and compete, or is there something he can do that would ensure him coming back as the starting quarterback?
Well, if he receives a huge contract worth starters' money, because right now Johnny Manziel isn't making a lot of money. Yeah. He's averaging about a little bit over $2 million per year with his contract, which is not a lot. Brian Hoyer, if he goes out on the open market and he wins, I mean, look, he's won a lot of football games already for the Browns, 6-1 at home, 8-3 overall. There are teams that will pay a premium for that. And there are teams that will be looking for starters. And so if he knows that he can go out and get a starting job and starting money on the open market, and he's not sure here, if they are going to keep him, they're going to have to prove to him through dollar signs that they're willing to pay him like a starter.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot of teams. You mentioned there's a lot of teams that need starters. We're going to see a few of those teams. Houston just made a quarterback change. They're going with Ryan Mallett. I mean, that's a team that would love to have the Browns quarterback situation right now. So there's a lot of interesting things happening.
Bill O'Brien, of course, is a Brian Hoyer fan.
Yeah.
And really liked him when they were in New England together. And a lot of what Brian learned about offense, he learned from Bill O'Brien. So, there's a history there between the two of them. And, hey, if Bill O'Brien comes calling and offers big money, right?
Yeah, what if Kyle Shanahan gets a head coaching job?
Right.
And he decides that he would love to have one of these quarterbacks running his offense, specifically Brian Hoyer.
Right. So there, it's going to get interesting. And again, I have to disagree with Ray that this is simple and not a challenge, because I do think that that it's a little bit of a challenging situation, and it could get even more so depending on what happens between now and the end of the season and how many games Brian wins.
The offensive line. That's someone in the comments brought that up. The O-line. Nick McDonald now, he'll be making his third start. We saw him get pushed around a little bit by Gerald McCoy. Is there still some concern there going up against this Cincinnati front seven? He's a little bit banged up, but they're still pretty good. Yeah,
they are banged up, and there are some guys that are out. However, Geno Atkins is starting to come around from, he missed the last 7 games of last season with a torn ACL. You're never really quite yourself at some of those positions the next year. So, but it's still a very good aggressive defensive front, and they're going to be looking to go right up the gut. Yep. They're going to watch that film, obviously. Marvin Lewis will be, that was not lost on him what happened last week. They're going to try to do the same thing. And if you look at the numbers, when Alex Mack was in there, they were averaging 146.4 yards per game in the first 5 games of the season. Over the last 3 games, it's 52 yards, almost a third of what they were averaging. So, you can see, the dire straits that they've been in. And when you look at sacks, they only gave up, I can't remember, I had these numbers today, but the sack totals have changed a lot over the last 3 games from the first 5 games as well.
We know, of course, what a win would mean tomorrow night. If they go down to Cincinnati and they lose that game, are there long-term implications there, or does it depend on how they lose? If Brian Hoyer plays poorly, or if we continue to see some of the things we saw in these wins over bad teams, what are the long-term implications of a potential loss? Well,
first of all, you move to 1-3 in the division. Yeah. Okay. At that point, you really are putting yourself behind the 8 ball for being able to make the playoffs. Yeah. If you want to make the playoffs, you really have to try to win this football game, because if you don't, then you're probably going to be looking at trying to get in as a wild card, and that's very, very difficult unless you win probably 10 games. Yeah. So, it's vitally important. It's vitally important that they win this game in large part, because of that division record and what that's going to mean going forward.
So I picked the Bengals. I don't remember the score, but the divisional road game thing scared me. I believe you picked the Browns, though.
You know what? I did, and here's why. Because I think that the Browns have always been able to rattle Andy Dalton.
Yeah.
Not always, but he does not have stellar statistics and numbers against the Browns. Last year, they picked him off 3 times in the 2 games. Okay. Yeah. In his last 4 games, he has 5 interceptions. Meanwhile, the Browns are picking off balls like crazy. So one of my matchups, or one of my key matchups that I have online right now, is Andy Dalton versus Tayshaun Gibson. Yeah. And or Joe Hayden. Joe Hayden's picked him off 3 times. So I do think that there will be opportunities there. And Marvin Lewis, even when I asked him about Andy Dalton on a conference call, and he said he's got to protect the football. He threw 2 interceptions against the Jaguars last week. So he's in one of these places where he's doing that. And I think, hey, if they unleash Paul Kruger, Barkevius Mingo, Jabal Sheard, Carlos Dansby, these guys on Andy, and get him rattled, which I think they can do. They have some injuries on the offensive line, too. Andre Smith, their right tackle, is doubtful for this game with an ankle injury. So there are going to be opportunities here to get to Andy Dalton, and I think they're going to do it. And I think they're going to force him into interceptions, and I think that will be the difference in the game.
Yeah, we've seen this defense. They're not great on every down. Right. They give up yardage, but They can make that one play. They can get that one pressure on the quarterback, that one interception, that one forceful, whatever it is, they've shown that they can get that one big play so far over the last few weeks that can change a game.
Yeah, and when you can do that, it makes up for the 125 yards that Jeremy Hill is going to rush for. It's going to, it can make up for, Terrence West, Ben Tate, and Isaiah Crowell struggling to run the football. It can make up for Brian Hoyer not being as accurate as you're going to want him to be on the deep ball. But if you can punch it out of there, if you can get a rookie running back to fumble the ball away, if you can sack Andy Dalton and strip him, and if you can get an interception, you're going to win the football game.
All right, Browns-Bengals tomorrow night. We'll have full coverage throughout the day on cleveland.com/Browns. And, of course, as usual, we'll have our pregame show, our in-game chat, our postgame show, and Mary Kay and Tom Reed will have all kinds of post-game reaction from the locker room, instant analysis right after the game, all that good stuff you've become used to on game days at cleveland.com/Browns. That'll do it for another edition of Wednesday Browns Insider. For Mary Kay Cabot, I'm Dan Labbe. Thanks for watching.